there is a lot of talk about Auroville's community processes. Now, the hypocrisy of that kind of statement is not understood by most people who are not inside of Auroville and know what is going on here actually. Because it's very easy to say these things like, oh, we have community processes and we're doing things like this and like that. And it sounds always like, oh, there are very clear rules about how things went on in Auroville before secretary came. But to give you a clear example of what actually happened here, I want to talk about the new entry policy from more than 10 years ago. So in 2012 already, I think, maybe earlier, I don't know exactly because I wasn't really taking notice of these things. There was an entry task force because there was generally a very uncomfortable feeling in Auroville about how the people coming into Auroville, the entry, was being dealt with. So there was an entry service comprised of 7 or 8 people who would then decide, yes, you, no, you not. It was very arbitrary. I mean, it was supposed not to be arbitrary. There was supposed to be some policy. But in the end, of course, it ends up being subjective to it depends on the 7 or 8 people that are there, who gets in and who doesn't get in. Originally, in the olden days, mother would decide who would be allowed inside Auroville. And just based on some picture or so that somebody from the society would hand over to her and then ask her, can these people live in Auroville, yes or no? So that had changed, of course, when mother passed away. All of that changed completely, and then we had to fight with the Sri Aurobindo Society. I'll make a separate video on that. But so by the time I came here, there was an entry service where you needed to apply and then have interviews with them, and they would then decide whether or not to announce you as a newcomer and after 1 year as an Aurovillian. That 1 year had also been 2 years at one point, but that was not so long. So for the most of Auroville's time after mother's passing, the newcomer period was for 1 year. So around 2011, 2012, there was this feeling like that, why do we have 7 or 8 people deciding about such an important thing in Auroville? So an entry task force had been formed, and they had been looking into what do we actually want, what did mother say, there was a whole process. And at the end of it, they posted their decisions saying that this should, in fact, according to what we feel and think and what we see most people agree with, the whole process should be completely different. There should be something totally else happening here and not these 7, 8 people. So there was a point where they reached an agreement where they thought, okay, we want to have this completely differently. We make a proposal where this will go differently, completely. And the entry service that was there at that time flatly refused to do it. So when they refused it, there was this kind of point of, okay, what do we do? Are we going to get a fight over this, or are we going to let it go? And in fact, the entry task force decided more or less to let it go and to just say, okay, this is what we did, this is what we came to. But because the entry service refuses to implement it, it goes nowhere. It stops here. So there was a post. There was this whole thing was posted publicly, and out of that, the council took it on then and created a kind of process to start implementing the new policy. So the entry task force, what they had done was taken up later by the Auroville Council. The council started the whole process to formulate a totally new policy for the entry. It took several years. It ended only in 2015, in fact. And through these 3 years, I think, that it took, there were so many meetings, so much input. Everybody was invited to come and have a say in it. It was endless. There was loads of feedback. The one thing that was really positive about that whole process, in which I participated only very, very little bit, the one good thing about the process was that it was clear that they would not just accept feedback in the sense of, I don't want this, I don't like this. Everybody was allowed to have a say in what was going on, but you needed to have a kind of rationale, a kind of explanation for, so what do you actually think and what do you propose? Not just bluntly say, I hate this is stupid, go. Blah. So it was a very long process. It took lots of time. There were many rounds in which the policy was formulated, reformulated, adjusted, reformulated. So in 2016, in fact in 2015, the policy was completely changed and the entry service was abolished and changed into, in fact, an entry secretariat. So they would no longer, the people in the secretariat would no longer be the deciding voices on who would enter or not of Auroville. And every newcomer, every applicant would be assigned a few mentors. Every person could choose one mentor themselves, and they would get two other mentors assigned to them. So there was, every person would have 3 mentors, and the 3 mentors among themselves would decide whether this person would become a newcomer, yes or no, or whether this person would become an Aurovillian, yes or no. So they would have to be in agreement, all 3 of them, and make this recommendation to the entry service, which had become the entry secretariat. And then the entry secretariat would announce it to the community. And so if ever there was some feedback from the community and there was feedback enough, there would be a meeting held to discuss what exactly in this particular case of this particular person would be best for Auroville to take. What would we do? Yes or no? Would we allow them, not allow them? Later, whatever. So before that point, what is very important to understand is that a lot of local Tamil people were refused. For some strange reason, totally not racist or colonial, a lot of people from the local area were pushed out and were constantly said, like, okay, you need to do more volunteering. So before becoming newcomer, you had to do more volunteering. So they would not even allow them to become a newcomer. And that period would be extended, or there would be a newcomer, and then they would say at the end of the year, well, we don't think you're ready yet, do another half year of newcomership or something. So the door was really kept quite tightly closed, while the pressure from the local people on the entry service was mounting and mounting and mounting. I very vividly remember one day around that time, I don't know anymore, 2015 or something, standing in front of the entry service with a Tamil person who had been here for more or less all his life. I can give names if names need to be, but I won't tell them immediately in this video. But so there was this Tamil boy who had been here for more or less his whole life, asking to become a newcomer. And he was told the same thing, like, you need to do another 6 months of volunteering or something. And so people need to understand, because if you have not been here, it's probably not clear how expensive it is to live in Auroville if you need to just pay for everything. So being a volunteer in Auroville is an extremely expensive enterprise. Everything here costs a fortune. So having these things pushed always, even a year of newcomership for local people, is generally impossible to go through, because you need to pay a monthly taxation fee to Auroville, and that alone already is it's several thousand rupees. So even back then it was quite a high amount, even though it was lower than it is today. It was quite a high amount. But so I was standing with a Tamil boy in front of the entry service, and the entry service was closed, but comes along a member of the then entry service. Yes, it wasn't changed yet. So comes along a member of the entry service, and so we start discussing this case of this boy, like what is happening. And in that discussion, that person says, like very normal Western European people. We're all like that, prejudiced and indoctrinated and totally supremacist and whatever. So that person says very, frankly and sincerely, so to speak, very openly says, but we cannot let in all of the Tamilians. And there is no awareness of how that sounds in the ears of a Tamil boy or the Tamil local people. There's just nothing. It's just like, it's an obvious fact, no? Isn't it obvious? We can't let in all of the Tamilians, even though it's their land, they live here. They should be part of Auroville, and Mother called them the first Aurovillians. So that is an aside, but a very important one, because one of the very big issues always has been the demand of the local people to become Aurovillians and the difficulty for them to really get into Auroville. So we get to 2015 when the new policy is finally agreed, finally approved. So no more entry service, it becomes an entry secretariat, and there are mentors, 3 mentors per person, who will decide whether this person, yes or no, is ready to become an Aurovillian. So the then entry service needs to shift because of the policy was voted on. I'll tell that because there's so many of these things. So the process, the community process. So the policy is voted on, and was voted on with a vast majority, was accepted. Then the entry service needs to start implementing the new policy, where they need to change themselves into a secretariat and no longer be a service that decides. And they need to start creating a mentor pool and having mentors assigned to all of the newcomers. So what happens? They don't like it, and they don't do it. So there's a new person. The entry service worked at that time on rotation. So not to have constantly new teams needing to learn the ropes. There would be yearly 1 or 2 people who would be replaced. So there would be a tiered kind of replacement of the service. So a new person would come in, would be trained by the existing people. And so not to leave the entry service cold turkey, like suddenly there's no, before, when I came, the situation was like that. You had a group of people for a few years, then they would go, and then the new group of people would come, but then they had to just reinvent the wheel all the time. So by that time, there was a tiered system that had started, which was like replacement, little by little, 1 person or 2 people per year. So the last addition to the then entry service was noticing that nothing was happening. There was no new policy being implemented. There was nothing happening. So that person was ringing a bit of an alarm bell, like, this isn't happening, dears. We're so many months after the vote, and we're supposed to be implemented all of this, and we're not doing it. So then the Auroville Council stepped in again, because they were the ones that had formulated that new policy. Lovely flies that come to your face. So the Auroville Council stepped in and started in a few months a process of, okay, are you going to implement it? Are you not going to implement it? If you're not going to implement it, we will have to replace you, because this is a policy that has been voted by the community process. So you need to start doing it. Okay, so suddenly, somewhere in August, something like August 2016, the whole entry service was changed and new people were put in. I think 1 person or so stayed. And so new people were put in who were there to implement the new voted on policy. So the entry service becomes the entry secretariat. Every person gets 3 mentors assigned to them, and they will decide whether the person gets into Auroville or not. The people, strangely enough, who started doing this were Antim, Muriel, and Joel, and a few others, like Selvam was there, and someone else, but I forget his name. So, but mainly it was Antim, Muriel, and Joel who were taking care of this wanted and needed change. In fact, it's a policy change that was wanted since so many years. Okay, so they got a period of 3 months to try. In these 3 months, they were letting in, obviously, a truckload of Tamil people, because there was an immense amount of Tamil people who had been waiting for years to be allowed into Auroville. And now that the rules had changed and only the mentors needed to agree, most of the mentors had no problems with the Tamils, and there was a lot of Tamilian people joining Auroville. In fact, in general, the amount of people that joined Auroville in these 3 months, or in the year 2016, was incomparable to what had happened over all of the past decades of I mean, it was the peak year up until then, and for many years after. It was the peak year of people joining Auroville, of growth of the Auroville population. So within these 3 months, there were some people in Auroville, the people who always decide about things, who thought, well, this isn't what we want. We don't want all these Tamil people in. There are things, and they started picking on certain cases. There may have been one person who was probably not an ideal person to join Auroville, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know the details of that case, but they took that as a club to start bludgeoning Auntie Muriel and Joel with. So they were starting to say, this is going wrong. We can't have this happen. There's something not okay here. And from that moment, the whole thing, you cannot believe it, but within 1 year, the whole process of, I think, 5 years or so, was annulled and undone. So by the end of 2017, probably before the end of 2017, the whole new policy was hollowed out, had been adjusted, had been changed, had been turned back. So instead of the entry service that had become the entry secretariat, they didn't turn it back to the entry secretariats. No, they created the entry service anew. It was now called the entry board. And here we had again 7-8 people who would decide by themselves along with the mentors. But the mentors didn't, I mean, it became ridiculous. Why would you have mentors and an entry board? It was idiotic. But anyway, just to say, there was a process, a community process of 5 years that had been completely undone within 1 year by the people here who scream and shout and claim and do whatever, and who want to have a say, obviously Western people, and who want to have a say and decide for everybody here. They just want to decide. And so they sowed they started lying, they started spreading lies, they started slandering Auntie Muriel and Joel. They were it was so bad. It ended in a meeting that was like a witch trial for Auntie Muriel and Joel, where they were more or less publicly slandered, condemned of being nasty, lying people. It was horrible. It was literally, I had already big doubts before that about how community processes and meetings here went. But at that moment, I decided I would never ever go to another Auroville meeting again, because this was falsehood on display. It was medieval. It was a public lynching. It was just, there was no truth anywhere. It was all based on falsehood and people lying with a straight face in front of 100 people or so that were there. It was so disgusting, and it still is the same thing. It is so disgusting. Mother asked one thing: cling to truth. Cling to truth. And people here lie with a straight face just to get power and to be the ones who decide what happens here. And that, my dears, is really what's going on here on that side. And so when they tell you about policies and processes and community, I've seen what it really is, and I can guarantee you it's got nothing to do with any of it. We need sincerity here. Mother asked us to be sincere, to be honest, to have goodwill, And if you start lying and slandering and blackening other people because they're doing something you don't like, I don't think that's honesty and goodwill. I don't think that fits in this place. I don't think actually that's what the charter asks, and I don't think that's what Mother asks. So know this and know that we're moving on in a different way because it was absolutely needed. Because what was happening here before didn't have much value. Jai Ma, Jai Hind.